My dear students, good morning everyone. We are presenting chemical and neural control of respiration for BSc third year, animal physiology paper first and unit third. This topic is presented before you by me, Prem Singh Chauhan, myself, Associate Professor in Geology at Seth Ranglal Government PG College, Rajsamand. At the same time, on the deputation at Samrat Prithviraj Chauhan, Government College, B. Glossary for the terms are acclimatization, the physiological adaptation of the human body to high altitudes where the concentration of atmospheric oxygen is much lower. Chemosensitive area located in the medulla and also referred to as the chemical chemoreceptors. It is highly sensitive to carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion concentration and excites the other respiratory centers. Glomus cells. Glandular like cells present in the aortic and carotid bodies. It is suggested that these cells might play a role in peripheral chemoreceptors. Peripheral chemoreceptors. The carotid and aortic bodies together referred to as the peripheral chemoreceptors. Chemical control of respiration. The ultimate goal of the respiration is to maintain proper concentration of the oxygen and carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion in the tissues. It is fortunate, therefore, the respiratory activity is highly responsive to change in each of these substances. Excess CO2 or excess hydrogen ion in the blood mainly acts directly on the respiratory centers itself, causing greatly increased strength of both the respiratory, inspiratory, and expiratory motor signals to the respiratory muscles. Oxygen, in contrast, does not have a significant direct effect on the respiratory centers of the brain in controlling respiration. Instead, it acts almost entirely on the peripheral chemoreceptors located in the carotid and aortic bodies. And these chemoreceptors in turn transmits appropriate nervous signals to the respiratory center for the respiration. This has been explained in this diagram. Direct chemical control of the respiratory center activity by CO2 and hydrogen ions. Chemosensitive area of the respiratory centers beneath the ventral surface of the medulla. There are mainly three areas of the respiratory centers: the dorsal respiratory group of the neurons and the ventral respiratory groups, and the pneumotaxic center. It is believed that none of this is affected directly by the changes in the blood CO2 concentration or the hydrogen ion concentration. Instead, an additional neuronal area, a chemosensitive area, shown in this figure, the chemosensitive area located bilaterally, laying only 0.2 mm beneath the ventral surface of the medulla. The area is highly sensitive to change in the either blood PCO2 or hydrogen ion concentration, and it in turn excites the other portion of the respiratory center. This is the inspiratory area, chemosensitive area, which is just beneath 0.2 mm below beneath the ventral surface of the medulla, and this is responsible for change in the concentration of the carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion. Excitation in the chemosensitive neurons by the hydrogen ion is likely the primary stimulus. The sensor neurons in the chemosensitive area are especially excited by hydrogen ions. In fact, it is believed that hydrogen ions may be the only important direct stimulus for these neurons. However, hydrogen ions do not easily cross the blood-brain barrier. For this reason, change in the hydrogen ion concentration in the blood have considerably less effect in the stimulating the chemosensitive neurons than do changes in the blood carbon dioxide, even though carbon dioxide is believed to stimulate these neurons secondarily by changing the hydrogen ion concentration as explained in the coming new following sections. Carbon dioxide stimulates the chemosensitive area, although carbon dioxide has little direct effect in the stimulating the neurons in the chemosensitive area. It does have a potent indirect effect. It has this effect by reacting with the water of the tissue to form carbonic acid, which dissociates into the hydrogen and bicarbonate ions. The hydrogen ions then have a potent direct stimulatory effect on the respiration. This is the reaction has been shown in front of you. Carbon dioxide reacts with water molecule, it forms carbonic acid, and again it dissociates into the bicarbonate ion and hydrogen ion. Why does blood carbon dioxide have a more potent effect in stimulating the chemosensitive neurons than do the blood hydrogen ions? The answer is that the blood-brain barrier is not very permeable to the hydrogen ion, but CO2 passes through this barrier almost as if the barrier did not exist. Consequently, whenever the blood pCO2 increases, so does the pCO2 of the both the interstitial fluid of the medulla and the cerebrospinal fluid. In the both these fluids, the carbon dioxide immediately reacts with the water to form new hydrogen ions. Thus, paradoxically, more hydrogen ions are released into the respiratory chemosensitive area of the medulla when the blood CO2 concentration increases. Then, when the blood hydrogen ion concentration increases, for this reason, respiratory center activity is increased very strongly by change in blood carbon dioxide, a fact that was subsequently discussed in quantitatively. It says that this hydrogen ion cannot pass the blood brain barrier to this side. So what happens that only the CO2 can pass this blood brain barrier, and as and when the CO2 enters into the chemosensitive area, the cerebrospinal fluids and tissue fluids react with CO2, and again it forms the carbonic acid H2CO3, which undergoes dissociation and forms hydrogen and carbon dioxide again. So increase in the carbon dioxide concentration in the chemosensitive area stimulates this area for the respiration. Decrease stimulatory effect of the CO2 after the first 1 or 2 days. Excitation of the respiratory center by the CO2 is a great first few hours after the blood CO2 first increases, but then it gradually declines over the next 1 or 2 days, decreasing to about 1/5 of the initial effect. Part of this decline results from the renal readjustment of the hydrogen ion concentration in the circulating blood back towards normal after the CO2 first increases the hydrogen ion concentration. The kidneys achieve this readjustment by increasing the blood bicarbonate, which binds with the hydrogen ion in the blood and cerebrospinal fluid to reduce their concentration. But even more important, over a period of hours, the bicarbonate ions also slowly diffuse through the blood brain and blood cerebrospinal fluid barriers and combine directly with the hydrogen ion adjacent to the respiratory neurons as well as thus reducing the hydrogen ion back to the near normal. A change in the blood carbon dioxide concentration before has a potent acute impact on controlling respiration tree drives, but only a weak chronic effect after a few days adaptation. Quantitative effect of the blood PCO2 and hydrogen ion concentration on alveolar ventilation. This slide represents the effect of the atrial blood, PCO2 and other factors, the rate of ventilation. This figure represents the quantitatively the approximate effect of the blood PCO2 and blood pH when is an increase logarithmically. Measure of the hydrogen ion concentration on alveolar ventilation. Note especially the very marked increase in the ventilation caused by an increase in the PCO2 in the normal range between 35 to 75 mmHg. This line represents the PCO2 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 and 100, and this is the alveolar ventilation basal rate is equal to 1. It starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and this lower diagram represents the hydrogen ion concentration in the pH, which reduces from 7.6 to 6.9. What it says that? It says that the normal range between 35 to 75 mmHg, this is the 35 one, and 35 to this one is 75 mmHg. This is the range of the PCO2, which demonstrates the tremendous impact of the change in the CO2 on the controlling of the respiration. This 45 mm, this one is normal one, and as and when PCO2 is increases, this diagram will go in this direction without increasing the PS, this one. Change in oxygen have little direct effect on the control of the respiratory center. Change in the oxygen concentration have virtually no direct effect on the respiratory center itself to alter the respiratory drives, although oxygen changes do have an indirect effect, acting through the peripheral chemoreceptors. We learned earlier that the hemoglobin oxygen buffer system delivers almost exactly normal amount of the oxygen to the tissue even when the pulmonary PuCO2 changes from a value as low as 60 mmHg up to a value as high as 1000 mmHg. Therefore, except under special conditions, adequate delivery of the oxygen can occur despite the changes in the lung ventilation ranging from the slightly below one half normal to as high as 20 or the more times normal. This is not true for the CO2 because both the blood and the tissue PCO2 changes inversely with the rate of the pulmonary ventilation. Thus, the process of animal evolution have made carbon dioxide the major controller of the respiration, not the O2. Yet, for those special conditions in which the tissues get into the trouble for the lack of oxygen, the body has a special mechanism for the respiratory control located in the peripheral chemoreceptors outside the brain respiratory center, and this mechanism is response when the blood O2 falls too low, mainly below a PO2 of 70 mmHg, as explained in next section. Peripheral chemoreceptors system for the controlling of the respiratory activity, role of oxygen in respiratory control. In addition to control of respiratory activity by the respiratory centers itself, still another mechanism is available for the controlling respiration, and this mechanism is the peripheral chemoreceptors. These are these chemoreceptors are shown in this slide. Special nervous chemical receptors called chemoreceptors are located in several areas outside the brain, and they are especially important for detecting changes in the oxygen in the blood, although they also respond to a lesser extent to change in the carbon dioxide concentration and the hydrogen ion concentration. The chemoreceptor transmits nervous signals to the respiratory centers in the brain to help regulate respiratory activity. Most of the chemoreceptors are in the carotid bodies. And a very few are located elsewhere in association with the other arteries of the thoracic and abdominal regions. The carotid bodies are located bilaterally in the bifurcation of common carotid artery. Their afferent nerve fibers pass through the herring nerves of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Herring nerve of the glossopharyngeal nerves, and then to the dorsal respiratory area of the medulla. The aortic bodies are located along the arc of the aorta, and their afferent nerve fibers pass through the vagi, also the dorsal medullary respiratory area. Each of the chemoreceptor bodies receives its own special blood supply through a minute artery directly from the adjacent atrial trunk. Further blood flow through these bodies is extreme 20 times the weight of the bodies themselves and each minute. Therefore, the percentage of the oxygen removed from the following blood is virtually zero. This means that chemoreceptors are exposed to the all times to the atrial blood, not venous blood, and their PO2 values are atrial PO2 values. Decrease in atrial oxygen stimulates the chemoreceptors. When the oxygen concentration in the atrial blood falls below the normal, the chemoreceptors become strongly stimulated. This effect is demonstrated by this diagram. This is the effect of PO2 on impulse rate and carotid bodies, and this side represents carotid body nerves impulse per second. Atrial PO2 in mmHg start from 0 to 500 mmHg, and carotid impulse rate increases from 0 to 800. And this diagram depicts the presentation of the impulse rate and the carotid bodies. What it says that normal the chemoreceptors becomes strongly stimulated. This effect, which shows the effect of different level of atrial PO2 on the rate of nerve impulse transmission from a carotid body. Note the impulse rate is particularly sensitive to change in the atrial PO2 in the range of 60 to 30 mmHg. This is the range 60 to 30 mmHg is the range where marked change in the pulse rate. A range in which hemoglobin saturation with oxygen decreases rapidly. This decrease in saturation of the oxygen with the hemoglobin. Increased carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion concentration stimulates the chemoreceptors. An increase in the either carbon dioxide concentration or the hydrogen ion concentrations also excites the chemoreceptors, and in this way indirectly increases the respiratory activity. However, the direct effect of both these factors in the respiratory centers are much more powerful than their effect mediated through the chemoreceptors, about 7 times as powerful. Yet, there is one difference between the peripheral and central effect of the carbon dioxide. The stimulation by the way of peripheral chemoreceptors occurs as much as 5 times as rapidly as the central stimulation. So, the peripheral chemoreceptors might be especially important in increasing the rapidity of response to the carbon dioxide at the onset of the exercise. The basic mechanism of the stimulation of the chemoreceptors by the oxygen deficiency, the exact means by which low PO2 excites the nerve ending in the carotid and aortic bodies are still not completely understood. However, these bodies have multiple highly characteristic glandular-like cells called glomus cells that synapse directly or indirectly with the nerve ending. Current evidences suggest that these glomus cells function as the chemoreceptors and they stimulate the nerve endings. Glomus cells have oxygen sensitive potassium channels. Glomus cells have oxygen sensitive potassium channels that are inactivated when blood PO2 decreases markedly. These are the oxygen sensitive glomus cells, and these are the potassium channels. Artery, this is PO2 and oxygen sensitive potassium channels. This inactivation causes the cells to depolarize, which in turn opens voltage gated calcium channels and increase intracellular calcium ion concentration. Stimulation of the PO2 opens the calcium channel. So the calcium from the outside undergoes inside the cytoplasm of these cells. As the intracellular calcium ion concentration is increased, the increased calcium ion stimulates the release of neurotransmitter that activates afferent neurons that send signals to the central nervous system and stimulate respiration. This increase in concentration stimulates the release of neurotransmitter which is acetylcholine, and these neurotransmitter NM, which is acetylcholine, stimulates the afferent fibers of the nerve which transmits impulse to the central nervous system. Although early studies suggest that dopamine or the acetylcholine might be the main neurotransmitters, and more recent studies suggest that during the hypoxia, adenosine triphosphate may be the key excitatory neurotransmitter released by carotid bodies of the glomus cells. We always know these dopamine and acetylcholines are the neurotransmitters, but at a certain extent, the ATPs also play a important role in the stimulation of the nerve endings as a neurotransmitter. So the whole reaction is summarized: increased level of the PO2, it stimulates the receptors of the glomerular zone and opens the potassium channels. This potassium change in the potassium voltage opens the calcium channel first, opens the calcium channel, increase the intracellular calcium concentration, which stimulates the release of neurotransmitters, and neurotransmitter stimulates the nerve ending, and nerve ending sends the stimulus to the central nervous system for the respiration. Sometimes ATP also act as the neurotransmitters. So the role of the glomus cells becomes clear amongst you. Now comes the effect of the low atrial PO2 to stimulate alveolar ventilation when atrial CO2 and hydrogen concentration remains normal. This next figure one. Effect of low atrial PO2 to stimulate effect of low atrial PO2 on the alveolar ventilation when PCO2 and hydrogen ion concentrations are kept constant at their normal levels. In other words, in this figure, only the ventilatory drives, because the effect of the low O2 in the chemoreceptors is active. The figure shows almost no effect on the ventilation as long as the atrial PO2 remains greater than 100 mmHg. However, at pressure lower than 100 mmHg, ventilation approximately doubles when the atrial PO2 falls to 60 mmHg. And can increase as much as 5 folds at very low PO2 values. Under these conditions, low atrial PO2 obviously drives the ventilatory process quite strongly. Because the effect of the hypoxia on the ventilation is modest for the PO2 values greater than 60 to 80 mmHg. The PCO2 and the hydrogen ions response are mainly responsible for regulating ventilation in healthy human at the sea level. Chronic breathing of the low oxygen stimulates respiration even more and phenomenon of acclimatization. Mountain climbers have found that when they ascend a mountain slowly over a period of days rather than a period of hours, they breathe much more deeply and therefore can withstand far lower atmospheric oxygen concentration than when they ascend rapidly. This phenomenon is called acclimatization. I repeat it once again. Mountain climbers have found that when they ascend a mountain slowly over a period of days rather than a period of hours, they breathe much more deeply and therefore can withstand for lower atmospheric oxygen concentration. When they ascend rapidly. This phenomenon is called acclimatization. The reason for the acclimatization is that within 2 or 3 days, the respiratory centers in the brain stem loses about 4 to 5 of its sensitive to change in PCO2 and hydrogen ions. Therefore, the excess ventilatory blow off of the carbon dioxide that normally would inhibit an increase in the respiration pulse to occur, and low oxygen can drive the respiratory systems to a much higher level of alveolar ventilation than under acute conditions. Instead of the 70% increase in the ventilation that might occur after acute response to low PO2, low oxygen. The alveolar ventilation often increases 400 to 500% after 2 and 3 days of the low O2, which helps immensely in supplying additional oxygen to the mountain climbers. The composite effect of the PCO2 pH and PCO2 on the alveolar ventilation. This figure represents the alveolar ventilation on one side and PCO2 changes in another side at different PO2 levels. The quick overview of the manner in which the chemical factors PO2, the PCO2 and pH, red pH 7.4 and blue pH 7.3. To understand this diagram, the first over the 4 red curves. 1, 2, 3 and 4, these 4 red curves. These curves were recorded at different level of atrial PO2. Atrial PO2 40 mmHg, 50, 60 and 100 mmHg. For each of these curves, the PCO2 was changed from lower to higher levels. The PCO2 changed from lower to higher, 30 to 50. Thus, this family of the red curve represents the combined effect of the alveolar PCO2 and oxygen on the ventilation. Now observe the green curves. These are the 1, 2, 3 and 4 green curves, where the red curves were measured at the blood pH of 7.4. These green curves are measured at the pH of 7.3. 7.3. This is the pH where green curves are plotted. We now have two families of the curve representing the combined effect of the PCO2 and PO2 on ventilation at two different pH values. Still, other families of the curves would be displaced to the right at higher pH and displaced to the left at lower pH. Increase in the pH shifted it to the right and decrease in the pH decrease in the shifted to the left. Thus, using this diagram, one can predict the level of alveolar ventilation for the most combined of the alveolar PCO2 and alveolar PO2 and the atrial pH. Now, our main aims come. to close, where we are going to explain regulation of respiration during exercise. During strenuous exercise, oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide formation can increase as much as 20 folds. Yet an healthy athlete and illustrate in this diagram. Alveolar ventilation ordinarily increases almost exactly in this step with increased level of oxygen metabolism. The atrial PO2, PCO2 and pH remain almost exactly the normal. In trying to analyze what caused the increased ventilation during exercise, one is tempted to ascribe this increased ventilation to increase in the blood carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions plus a decrease in blood oxygen. However, this attribution is questionable because measurement of the atrial PCO2, pH and PO2 shows that none of these values changes significantly during the exercise. So none of them becomes abnormal enough to stimulate respiration as vigorously as observed during strenuous exercise. Therefore, what causes intense ventilation during exercise? At least one effect seems to be predominant. The brain on the transmitting motor impulses to the exercising muscles is believed to transmit collateral impulses into the brainstem at the same time to excite the respiratory center, and this action is analogous to stimulation of vasomotor centers of the brainstem during the exercise, and that causes a simultaneous increase in atrial pressure. Actually, when a person begins to exercise, a large share of the total increase in the ventilation begins immediately on initiation of the exercise. Before any blood chemical have had time to change, it is likely that most of the increase in the respiration results from the neurogenic signals transmitting directly into the brainstem respiratory centers at the same time that signals go to the body muscles to cause muscle contraction. This diagram represents total ventilation per minute. Ventilation per meter starts from 0 to 120, and this side represents oxygen consumption in liters from 0 to 4.0. This is the figure showing moderate exercise where total ventilation is almost in and about 260, which increases during the extraneous severe exercise. This effect of exercise on oxygen consumption and ventilation. Interrelation between the chemical factors and neuron factors in the control of respiration during the exercise. When a person is exercise, direct nervous signals presumably stimulates the respiratory center almost the proper amount of to supply of the extra oxygen required for the exercise and blues of carbon dioxide extra CO2. Occasionally, however, nervous respiratory control signals are either too strong, too weak. Chemical factors then play a significant role in bringing about final adjustment of the respiration required to keep the oxygen and carbon dioxide and hydrogen and concentration of the body fluids as nearly normal as possible. This process is demonstrated in these figures. The lower curves this lower curve show changes in alveolar ventilation during 1 minute period of exercise. 1 minute period of exercise, and this is alveolar ventilation. 1 minute period of exercise, and the upper curve shows a atrial PCO2. This atrial PCO2. Note that at the onset of exercise, the alveolar ventilation increases almost instantaneously without an initial increase in atrial PCO2. Instantaneous increase without increase in the PCO2. So that at first it actually decreases atrial PCO2 below the normal. The presumed reason that the ventilation forces ahead of the buildup of blood CO2 is that the brain provides an anticipatory stimulation of respiration at the onset of exercise, causing extraalveolar ventilation even before it is necessary. However, about 30 to 40 seconds after, the amount of carbon dioxide released into the blood from the active muscles approximately matches the increased rate of ventilation, and the atrial PCO2 returns especially to the normal when the exercise continues towards the end of 1 minute period of the exercise in this figure. This figure represents the approximate effect of maximum exercise. This summarizes the control of respiration during the exercise in another ways. This time more quantitatively, the lower curves of this figure shows the effect of different level of PCO2 on alveolar ventilation when the body is at rest, that is not exercising. The upper curve shows the approximate shift in this ventilatory curve caused by the neurogenic drives from the respiratory centers that occurs during heavy exercise. The point indicate on the two curves show atrial PCO2 first in the resting state and then in the exercising state. Note in the both instances that the PCO2 is at the normal level of 40 mmHg. In other words, the neurogenic factor shifts the curve about 20 folds in the upward direction, so the ventilation almost matches the rate of CO2 releases, thus keeping atrial PCO2 near the normal value. The upper curve of this diagram also shows that if the during exercise the atrial PCO2 does change from the normal value of the 40 mmHg, it has an extra stimulatory effect on the ventilation at a PCO2 value greater than 40 mmHg and represent effect at a PCO2 values less than 40 mmHg. This next figure summarizes the whole neurogenic control of ventilation during the effect. This summarizes the various factors that regulate ventilation during the exercise. Contraction of diaphragm, contraction of diaphragm and external intercostal muscles. It inspire somatic from this direction. I start from the stimulus. These are the collateral motor impulse to muscles and the respiratory centers. These are the proprioceptors and the mechanoreceptors in limbs. And this one is the chemoreceptors, central and peripheral. This is the brain learned responses, and these one are the nociceptors, cardiac and temperature receptors. These all factors becomes the cumulative effect on the dorsal group of neurons, NTS. They firing inspiratory ramp signal. And these two factors, brain learned response and nociceptors, stimulates the ventral group of neurons. Dorsal group of neurons and ventral group of neurons. This dorsal group of neurons stimulates the somatic neurons of inspiration, which stimulates the contraction of the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles and undergoes inspiration. The same ways, ventral group of neurons stimulate the somatic neuron, expiration and inspiration, and contraction of the intercostal muscles and the abdominal muscles, and expiration takes place. Neurogenic control of ventilation during exercise may be partly a learned response. Many experiments suggest that brain's ability to shift the ventilatory response curve during the exercise is at least partly a learned response, and that is with repeated periods of exercise. The brain becomes progressively more able to provide the proper signals required to keep blood PCO2 at its normal level. Also, there is a reason to believe that even the cerebral cortex is involved in the learning, because experiment that blocks only the cortex also block the learned response. This topic, this lecture becomes too long, and today we are only studying the chemical regulation of the neurons. Next slides, which are covered under the neural regulation of the respiration. So we are come to an end, and ending this question before go the assignment. Explain the chemical regulation of the respiration. The next two questions: what do you understand by the sinus stroke breathing, and describe the role of the glomerulus cells during the respiration. So first and third question of this assignment have been covered by us today, but second question is remaining. So this answer of this question would be explained in the next chapter as neural control of the respiration. This is combined topic, neural and chemical, but chemical control keeps a long time, so we left the neural control of the respiration for the next session. Thank you for watching this video. Have a good day.